Okay, well, hello everyone. I'm Dick Johnson. I'm currently in Worcestershire, not far from the River Severn, just north of Worcester, which is roughly where I live as well. I'm in our office. I do various jobs. I have various hats. I suppose the hat I'm wearing this afternoon is mostly as the moderator, as we call it, chair of a national network of workplace chaplains, WCM UK, we call it. Used to be called the Industrial Mission Association. And we have about 200 members across the country who are busy as workplace chaplains, many of them in town centres and so forth. Mostly volunteers these days, but there are a few of us still who do this as a paid role within the church. I'm also the lead chaplain for West Mercia Police and Hereford and Worcester Fire and Rescue Service, as well as running our own charity here in Worcestershire for workplace chaplaincy. So the work I do nationally is an add-on, it's an extra that we network together on this sort of work. So that's me.
Amazing, amazing. Well, let's looking forward to hearing more from you, Dick. It's good, great to have you. So we've got Craig Prest from Hope for Justice. Craig, thanks for being with us.
Hi everyone. Really lovely to be with you guys and girls. It's going to be a great session. My name's Craig. I'm a Chief Development Officer for an organisation called Hope for Justice. We're a global anti-slavery organisation. And I also lead a church as well, where I live in the town of Warrington. And we've got a 5-plant church, and myself and my wife run one of those plants. So yeah, busy during the week and busy during the weekend. Keeps me out of trouble, but yeah, that's essentially me.
Brilliant, thanks, Craig. And we've got Tony Vino as well, a very good friend of mine. Tony, comedian and runs an entertainment business. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here and very excited about this meeting. I'm probably the only person here that doesn't lead any organisation or any church, but I'm just about coping to lead myself. But it's an honour to be amongst this esteemed panel.
You're so modest. Tony's one of the most natural chaplains that there is. He just acts, well, as well as running his business and his comedy shows. He's also an amazing informal chaplain to comics in that world, as well as having lots of other experience in chaplaincy as well. So we're really thrilled to have Tony here. Andy, we've got you on camera. That's good. Great to have you with us. Do you want to just introduce yourself, Andy?
Hi, folks. I'm a real Zoom expert. I would never do anything such as forget to unmute myself. It's lovely to see you all. And half of my life is doing musical stuff and speaking and songwriting, and half of my life is running a thing called Christians in Politics. And then somewhere in the other half, in the third half, I'm really passionate about the work of Gather and the stuff within the spheres. I guess through the experience of being involved in artisan, involved in Christians in the arts, and having been a doctor, being involved with the Christian Medical Fellowship, and then I guess a lot of those experiences helped me set up the Christians in Politics within the world of politics, and therefore got a little bit of a sense of what works in terms of actually helping support folks in the spheres, and passionate about seeing that roll out in a sustainable, meaningful way around the country.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, it's wonderful to have you as friends gathered together like this. We run a learning community webinar every month, and we look at different aspects of transformation of our places, social, cultural, and spiritual transformation of our places. And in particular, today we wanted to think about how we equip our churches and our church unity groups to see city leaders growing and flourishing in their places. And we want to use the word spheres, which I'm going to ask Andy in a minute to explain more to us about. But we're all really thinking about how do we empower Christians in their workplaces. And we're going to think about a few things. We're going to think about the big picture and then sort of come down to some steps that we can perhaps all take. And I think I'm excited that you're all in the room here because we're going to get all your thoughts on this subject, and it's being recorded as well. So it will act as, if you like, a podcast or something people can catch up on to reflect on this topic. So thank you again, and we're going to get started now. So I'm going to start. We're going to start with Andy Flannagan, helping us think about the big picture. Andy, just in terms of the spheres, just give us, these are quick fire questions for all of you, but just give us a quick fire definition of what ministry and mission to the spheres actually is.
Well, I think a lot of folks over the course of the last decade or two have migrated in the direction of the word sphere, and slightly away from the word mountain that some people may have used. Certainly people have migrated away from the word workplace, because lots of people that we're working with don't have a workplace, whether they're retired or unemployed or unable to work. And so we've landed on spheres as being a really useful catch-all framing for the places where people spend the majority of their time. And also because it means where we can utilize the really helpful sort of societal assessment that comes from talking about the spheres of culture, so that when you're making a case, especially to a church leader, about how it's really important to see the spheres of culture transformed, that we're not just talking about, well, it would be great to see, it would be great to support my people who are involved in education, and it'd be great to support my people who are involved in healthcare. Actually saying, no, these spheres, the spheres of society that have been proven and shown to show that are the main drivers of culture, that actually in doing that, we're actually discipling a nation. You know, in the words of Alan Platt, we all know that it takes a village to bring up a child, but who's bringing up the village? You know, like who is facilitating the ether, the stuff that allows our young people to grow up believing what they believe to be true? Because what the young people are growing up believing to be true is very different to what young people would have believed to be true 30 years ago. And why is that? That's cultural change. And it's been shown that the prime drivers of cultural change are business, arts, education, family, religion, still there, and politics, and media. And so, you know, it's pretty clear that we are massively influenced by those things. You know, the research showing that each of us sees 350 different media images every day. And so we're naive if we think, as those who lead congregations, that just by our 20 minutes with them on a Sunday morning, that we somehow have the major influence over what people believe to be right and wrong, true or false, possible or not possible. So we're not just talking about seeing those spheres transformed. Yes, we want to see education transformed in our towns and cities. Yes, we want to see healthcare transformed, but we actually are aware of the bigger picture stuff that the spheres feed into culture. And I think it's really helpful. I constantly share with people the fact that the word culture comes from the same root as the word cult. You know, that's where it comes from in the Latin. And when you think about cult following in a cult, that's the sort of leadership you follow, like kind of like a zombie, without even thinking about it. You know, somebody follows in a cult without even thinking about it. They've sort of checked in their brain. And that's the kind of leadership that culture gives to our young people, especially, and to all of us, to be honest. It's the sort of leadership that we don't even realize is happening to us. It's just in the ether. And so we're naive as leaders not to think that that's an important thing to be trying to influence. And our presence, we hope, as prayerful, Bible-believing Christians in the presence of those spheres, we hope has an antiseptic effect and has a transformative effect in the world of comedy, in the world of policing, or wherever we are. And so that's why we've used the framing of spheres, because number one, it's more inclusive, but number two, it sort of lifts our eyes to the bigger picture, as well as just doing what a lot of local good work does in trying to support workplace ministry, inverted commas. Does that make sense?
Brilliant. So you've got a lot of experience in some of these spheres. Actually, you've trained and worked as a GP. You're a musician.
Not as a GP, just as a doctor, but yes.
As a doctor, okay. As a musician and singer-songwriter, and also you've been very involved with politics in the Christians in Politics organisation. Let's just delve into something you've been doing recently. You've been doing a very interesting project called Changing the Soundtrack. Just tell us about that, just quickly.
Yes. As you can hear from my passion, I fully sold up to the idea of the need to, in every generation, smash the secular sacred divide. As Mark Green from LICC says, that the sacred secular divide that debate, theological debate, has been won in every generation, in every decade since the Second World War by a different theologian. You can start Newbegin, you can work your way through and see that it's always been won constantly, and it needs to be re-won. It's like accepting that we do need to re-win theological debate. But Mark would say, and I think I agree with him, that debate has been won in every decade since the Second World War, but it has never led to a functional change in the church. That yes, we give head knowledge, and we give assent to the idea of a broad holistic kingdom and the desire to see all of creation transformed. But actually, if you analyze our spreadsheets and where as churches we actually do our resourcing and where we spend our money, you could be forgiven for believing that actually what we really care about is just the gathered and putting on the best show possible on the Sunday. We're not actually meaningfully yet supporting the ministry of our folks in the gathered, in those spheres where they spend most of their time. And so as part of that, and that feeds through, one of the aspects that feeds through to in the gather is the language we use when we sing and in liturgy. And I'm sure many of the folks in this room would share, my frustration that quite often when we come together, what we're just facilitating is just a cultural experience where we're just regurgitating the same language of the sanctuary, so to speak. And my challenge to the bunch of songwriters that we got together last week was, have we been good at being worship pastors, good at making the people on the inside feel good and rub their tummies because we're singing lots of very familiar language? Or have we stretched to be using language and vocabulary that's used in the real world so that we can actually have a prophetic impact? So can we make the journey from being worship pastors but also be worship prophets, where we can actually join those two worlds? And I guess I was sharing the example of what happened with the National Prayer Breakfast in 2022 when some of Sajid Javid's team shared that the fact that one of the lines in the hymn, "Fill those who lead with your integrity," was quite key in him then deciding that he couldn't serve in that government with any integrity. And we all know what happened next. He resigned, and that was the first domino in Boris Johnson resigning. But that may not have happened but for the uncomfortable non-sanctuary language of saying, "Fill all who lead with your integrity in every sphere, culture, media, and trade." Those are words that we're not used to singing. So could we actually follow in the footsteps of David in what he did when he wrote Psalms? They were work Psalms. He was a soldier primarily, and they were crying out. 71 of the Psalms are him crying out about his enemies. And so that's not to say we want to write just military songs. We want to write songs using the language and metaphor of where we're spending most of our time. And so we had a joyous 2 days of encouraging some of the key songwriters in the UK into really experimenting with and using language that comes not just from in-house language. And it was really exciting what came out. But I just use that, I guess Mark's asking me that to illustrate the secular sacred divide point and the need to support and resource those folks. We've used songs that mention the word spreadsheet, and I've had emails from accountants saying, "Oh, it was the first time I really thought my work affirmed as meaningful gospel work because the song mentioned the spreadsheet." And it's just like, can we go through the pain barrier of inserting that language into our liturgy? Otherwise, all this stuff about the spheres and workplace will always seem like extracurricular activity if we're not actually inhabiting the words of our liturgy with the words of the real world.
Wow. I think it's just a brilliant story, Andy, and it is just empowering Christians, isn't it, to think and be envisioned about the work that they and the skills that they use every week in their workplaces for God and through worship. So thank you for that. Tell us a bit more. I mean, you've been a real blessing in this area of helping us think through spheres and how we mobilize spheres, given your experience. Can you help us think through how church unity groups, so that's a network of churches in a town or a city or a place, are actually dreaming about transformation of spheres, whatever those, whether it's health or business or anything else?
I think
how
really
are they
key,
dreaming about it as a kind of working together to do it?
I think what we've seen in the growth of church unity movements over the last couple of decades actually makes what we're talking about with sphere groups possible. Because when you get down to it, I often talk about my friends when we lived in London. I had friends who were leading churches in East London and would say to me, "Andy, I've got this wonderful guy who comes to my church and he's a great family man and he gives a lot to the collection, but he's an investment banker. And I don't really understand his world. I don't know whether what he does is ethical or not. I don't even know whether the entity he works for is ethical. And but how can I know that?" And unless we start having, bring your pastor to work days, how can you ever really fully know that? How can you interrogate that? How can you support him appropriately? How can you ask the right questions? And you multiply that career path by the 50 other career paths in the congregation, and it starts to make a nonsense of believing that any accurate discipleship can happen apart from the sort of core generic discipleship. Having been involved in these spheres, we're naive to not realize that these spheres are not uncontested territory, whether it's the word in the music industry or whether it's in politics or whether it's in high finance. These are not uncontested places. There are principalities and powers at play. There are glories in these places, but there are also darknesses in these places. And when we step in there attempting to be salt and light, we will rub up against those things, but we will need the support and the accountability and the challenge of other people who are having those same struggles and challenges, other people who are in that same world. But the challenge is, if you're leading a church of 40 or 50 people, there will only be 2 or 3 here in politics, there are 3 or 4 in education, maybe there are 4 or 5 in business. There is rarely the critical mass in an individual congregation to have a meaningful support group where that discipleship can happen. But across the 15 or 20 churches in a town, there absolutely is the critical mass to form one of those groups. And actually, it's a beautiful way of blurring the edges between churches. Churches coming together to find their unity in mission, where they've always been meant to find it. It's getting beyond that kind of slightly unsatisfactory experience of getting together just once a year for the unity service. If there's 15 different churches in a town, there's 15 different ways to do a service. And so we do a hymn to keep those guys happy and a song to keep those guys happy and some liturgy to keep those guys happy. It ends up being very piecemeal and very unsatisfying. But those same churches have now come together in the last couple of decades, realizing, 15 different ways to do a service, but there's only one way to dig a garden. There's only one way to paint a playground. And actually, when you come together in mission, real unity and real relationships are being formed. And we see that happening through these sphere groups. It's actually a brilliant way of bringing functional missional unity. People that would actually disagree about some stuff of doctrine actually disagree less about how they want to see the kingdom come in education and how they want to see the kingdom come in policing. Where they might have larger disagreements as to how you should gather and how you should sing and how you should worship. And so it's actually a great place of finding unity. And it's a great place because the unity is forged through lay people, not through the church leaders. So we're seeing church leaders being moved away from being log jams in the unity, if you know what I mean. If the church leaders are often really important in those first moments of identifying the lay leaders, the person who has some experience in the world of healthcare, who has been in that world, but who has maybe some capacity, maybe they're stepping towards retirement, maybe they're working part-time, but there's some capacity. That lay leader is the key person to get these groups going. So I think the church leaders have an important job in identifying and supporting these leaders, but once they actually identify them and sort of commission them, but the thing sits under the accountability and the energy and sustainability and some of the resource of the churches together or gather entity, then those things can fly. And that's you're actually taking work off the church leaders rather than giving them more work to do, because I just keep meeting church leaders around the country who are exhausted, sadly, because we've got to be into fostering and we've got to be into trafficking and we've got to do the debt stuff. And it's just like, oh my goodness, this is just and part of the pitch of this is to say, let these entities do the discipleship that you couldn't possibly do, that you do not have the time to do, that you do not have the expertise to. Let these entities take some of that burden off you and let this be a real place of discipleship that you don't necessarily have to control or be involved in.
So let's just talk that through in terms of what would be a next step then. If you've got a unity movement in a town, what do you do? You advertise that you want to bring teachers together, or what's the next step, Andy?
I think where it's happened most effectively, it started with a bunch of church leaders and other leaders within the town just going for breakfast or going for lunch, and to be honest, somebody standing with a whiteboard and making a list of the different spheres of society and the different workplaces and saying, right, who have we got in all these places? And you almost need that discipline of just stopping and praying and looking at education for 5 minutes and thinking, right, who have we got in our congregation, who's involved? And quite often that's when people go, oh yes, forgot, yes, he's a deputy head over at they're involved in that academy trust, or they're the primary GP provider. You suddenly stopping and thinking and praying, you're like, who might these people be? So I think stage one is getting folks together and sharing the vision of why this might be significant. but then actually doing that kind of what you might call talent spotting exercise, quite simply, and then going away and having conversations with some of those people to see whether they might be amenable to doing that sort of leadership and whether they might have the time or capacity to do so. Because everybody knows these groups only have life in terms of the leadership. So sadly, the story is so often that somebody gets enthusiastic about this stuff for 18 months and then they move on and do something else, or they get busy, or they get a promotion and they move, and the group dissipates. And that's why actually having them housed and held under the Gather network movements or the other churches together movements actually allows them to be that much more sustainable and accountable, and actually allows them to feed into how the church gathers and scatters. It actually starts to inform the rest of the church because it's connected, as opposed to, I guess we've had a history of, full gospel businessmen's fellowships, all these entrepreneurs who, to be honest, just get a bit annoyed at the state of church, so they go away and make their own thing and just hang out and do their own thing over here, rather than actually being connected to local church. And then the other thing that we want these groups to be doing is to drawing on the expertise of the national bodies, whether that's the Christian Police Association, Lawyers Christian Fellowship, Christians in Politics. There is expertise, theological expertise of educational theologians, political theologians, to work out how you do that, grappling how the gospel grinds up against that particular subculture. So some of that expertise needs to come nationally, but it needs to be supported and run locally, but then drawing on the expertise of some of these national bodies as well.
Okay, brilliant. So I got, if I'm a, junior doctor, I'm going to get to be with other healthcare professionals. I'm going to talk about what it is to be a Christian in my workplace and some of the challenges of that. I'm going to get to potentially wrestle with some theological stuff, referencing other groups from around the country that might help me with that. I guess we're also seeing with healthcare at the moment, there's a real opportunity for a network of churches to collaborate with the health systems, and maybe there's some response there that a group of healthcare professionals could help guide and advise, the church's collaboration with health. So that sounds really exciting. We're going to explore thinking about workplaces with you all individually. But before we do that, I just want to kind of open it up for a discussion on what Andy has said. Another word that I quite like is the word ecosystem. So it's different from just delivering a service in the community. It's actually creating the right environment for people to deliver services in their community. And so I suppose I want to just use that word about what Andy's saying, that a sphere in your town or city, bringing Christians together to think about mission and ministry in that sphere, needs a kind of ecosystem. It needs certain things. And I think, Andy, you've given us some ideas there. Get the church leaders together and whiteboard some names from that sphere. That would be part of the ecosystem, actually, getting the church leaders to come together like that. Are there any other thoughts that you've got? I want to pick your brains, everybody, on what would be a valuable part of the ecosystem to see a mission to the sphere from a church unity movement thrive. What would a healthy ecosystem need? Any thoughts from any of you? Tony, thanks.
A quick thought there, and it's slightly to do with the meeting I've just come off the back of anyway, but it's absolutely church spheres of unity, and there's a sort of relational dynamic come together. And Andy, I joined you with the artisan history, and I found it's really powerful, and in terms of my own journey. But I was also thinking about, as well as a sort of relational context for the connecting with the spheres, I wonder, and I'm just throwing this as an idea, is there also a kind of the idea of some kind of like liturgical aspect, or what I'll almost call like a rite of passage aspect as well? I'll tell you, the discussion I just had was with a chaplain guy. I just had a meeting with him, and he talked about the idea of there are certain thresholds in life, and certain moments. So you've got spheres of activity and occupation, but you've also got moments in life. So he talks about people coming out of certain spheres. So, for instance, his work, he's been working on a kind of liturgy as a rite of passage for people coming out of the army. So going back into, because often there's lots and lots of psychological problems at that point. People going from the army into citizen life, and so the idea of how do you create a passage from one to the other? Because you actually change sphere, and sometimes changing sphere isn't just about what you do, but there's also what's the birthplace into that. So anyway, that was just part of my thought. Is there, you know, in terms of the sphere, there's like, you know, these are the people working in, you know, medicine, education, and all that, and there's a meeting together. And you think about artists, and we had a sort of, you know, there's a way of meeting which was lovely. But thinking about, I suppose, liturgy and rites of passage in and out of the spheres as well. Anyway, just a thought.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's great, Tony. Thank you. Anybody else on what can we do as leaders to build an ecosystem? What would be good, Dick?
All sorts of ideas sparking around in my head from what Andy said and also Tony. Because it's the most recent thought, let me just pick up what Tony was saying there. And I think the idea of a liturgy as something to think about within the context of our communities and our spheres, as it were, is a really interesting concept. But I would want to say, I think, because, I mean, what is liturgy? It's the work of the people to actually engage with the divine with in terms of worship. But I see those liturgies being created by those people. We as church expect liturgies to look as in a certain way, but actually the liturgies that make sense to a lot of people in the world don't look like that.
Yeah.
And I think the task there is to connect what's happening naturally, almost, in terms of people discovering those liturgies, and the liturgy that we would engage with, perhaps, and which makes sense to us as people of faith, needs to actually come together. And I'd give you an example of what I mean. Now, I work with police and fire service, and one of the characteristics of those particular spheres is that people working in those will tend to come out of them professionally at a relatively early age compared to most of us. And they have a whole new career ahead of them often, because they're retiring at 50, 53, or whatever it might be. Certainly that's been the case in the past, not so much perhaps in the future. That's another story as well. But in terms of the need that they have to make that transition, they actually discover their amongst themselves in terms of what they do, how they gather together as people with a shared experience, which and they often tell me this: nobody else can understand what it's like to be a police officer except for another police officer. So there is that natural coming together, and that's I think so. I think there's a really rich vein to mine there in terms of liturgy. Coming back to the question though, what Andy was saying about churches together and so forth. In my experience as a workplace chaplain, if you encourage people from churches to get out of their churches and to do something practical, and chaplaincy to people at work is a very practical thing, not only do they bring a ministry to others, but they also discover something new for themselves. And I've lost count of people I've worked with as chaplains coming into chaplaincy, hadn't thought about it before. It's been suggested, yes, I'll join in, I'll see what that's about. And they come to me afterwards and they say, this is the best thing I've ever done in my faith, because I've discovered some new elements to my own faith by engaging with people who have apparently no faith. So it is giving a new dimension there. And I think in terms of how churches together, it's not just let's get together to talk about this. It is actually going out and doing something together. It needn't be chaplaincy. It could be working with younger people within the community, football, sports encouragement, things like that. I saw a brilliant program on the television a few weeks ago about boxing in Birmingham. I don't know if anyone saw that, but led by the community of people from the Sikh faith. And they were transforming young people's lives, who, because of the communities they were part of, were not necessarily engaging with their potential as human beings. And yet through sport, they managed to do it. So let's use those common ground of activity, which doesn't divide us as church, because we all have our axe to grind in that respect, don't we? This is the way to do church, as it were, as opposed to where you do church. But when you get out into the world, in a sports club, in workplace chaplaincy, whatever it might be, there's a common ground.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, that's my contribution to that point.
Brilliant, Dick. Yeah, empowering people to empower people. Thanks, Sam. Go for it.
Hi. So I don't know most of you. My name's obviously Sam Corduroy. I lead a missional unity movement in Harrogate, and I've been doing that for about 5 years. But prior to that, I spent nearly 20 years in, well, working for Procter & Gamble, which is a big multinational that makes brands like Pampers, Gillette, Ariel, what have you. There are about 40 brands. And I was in kind of marketing, advertising, sales, and actually led the global corporate social responsibility program for them for the last few years I was there. So I feel I've kind of got a foot in both camps when it comes to workplace and ministry. And one of the things that we've been doing as a unity movement in Harrogate is we've been gathering all the church leaders on what we've called like literally a 5-10 year journey about changing culture. So this isn't something you can do overnight. It's not something you can do through a preaching series, but how can we do the long haul together? And there were loads of great ideas about how to get started. But the thing that I felt really passionate about was actually ordinary people understanding that their whole life matters to God, all of it, every single bit of it. Because the only way we're going to transform our cities is by everybody, the whole body of Christ, being engaged the whole life. So we spent quite a lot of time talking about that as an idea. And then we've invited, you know, Mark Green to come and visit us a few times, so has been Benjamin. And we've gone through a whole series of a bit like movement days where we've taken church leaders on a journey, starting with that idea about identity, and then how do you preach through whole life eyes? How do you lead worship through whole life eyes? How do you do evangelism? That whole journey. And each time we knock it, you know, you get a little bit further down path.
Yeah.
So that's been a really interesting journey for us. But I really would say that for somebody in the workplace, and because of the way we do church, it just looks as though God and church don't care about their Monday to Saturday. So fixing that first and really everybody believing, especially the church leaders, that it does matter. And it's like the church service being like a half-time team talk is kind of, I would suggest, where to start, because otherwise you've got names on a whiteboard saying, come and help. If that person doesn't get that it matters to God, you're not going to have quite as much energy and enthusiasm from them.
Great, Sam. That's really helpful. Thank you. Peter, you had your hand up. Did you want to pitch in on this one?
Yeah. So I'm Peter Lumsden in Lancashire and worked for many years at University of Central Lancashire. Met Tony once, a good friend of Mark Slaney, I believe, and did a comedy night for us. Yeah. So, and I'm an academic, so I'm a biologist. So when you're talking about spheres, it sort of made me think of Venn diagrams. And within the VCFSC, the Voluntary Community Faith Sector, I think we're actually in the faith bit of that. So my strapline is I'm keeping the F in the VCFSE. And I think the faith sector can actually be that intersection of the three, you know, health, local authority, voluntary sector. Because very often I find it's quite bipartisan, that the voluntary sector is working with health or working with the local authority. We don't always get all three partners together. So that was just a thought. And when Andy was talking about, or whatever Andy was talking about, it made me think of community organising and Citizens UK. I'm the co-chair of Lancashire Citizens, and one tool we do is a power analysis with a whiteboard or a flip chart to see who are and to actually map who are the key people in different organisations. And then the third thing that struck me with the discussion around liturgy or inviting, I think there's again a potential to use what's already there. I think Dick was alluding to this. So rather than creating something new or setting up something new, and people are so busy, using what we've already got. For example, the dates in the Christian calendar. My Muslim friends are very good at this, and during Ramadan, inviting people to an iftar. My Sikh friends are also really good at inviting people to one of their festivals. The Sikhs in Prest, and I swear I've got the biggest teapot in the world. But they did a ceremony. I think it might have been Vaisakhi, I'm not quite sure. But they took the flagpole down and we cleaned the flagpole together, washed it in yogurt and rinsed it in water. And then the new flagpole was raised outside. And it was a great practical thing, but also with quite strong religious and cultural symbolism to it. And people were invited to it. And it was a bit quirky, but it was, it was very significant for the Sikhs. They were probably reading the Guru Gobind Singh, the 10th Guru, the book. They were reading that at the same time upstairs. So I think there's, Pentecost is coming up. Who now knows that the end of May bank holiday is Whitsun and Pentecost? So I think there's scope for us to use some of the dates that we've got in the Christian calendar as a focal point to invite people into, rather than what is sometimes perhaps a bit artificial of getting together to pray during the week of prayer for Christian unity, good as that might be. But in terms of inviting wider partnerships together, I think we've got a lot of, tradition is really there. And I think those traditional roots still resonate with a lot of people if we can tap into them in the right way.
Yeah, opening up our faith in accessible ways. Thank you. I want to go on to Craig now. Sam mentioned CSR, corporate social responsibility, and I want Craig to help us think a little bit about this. CSR is really about how businesses, organizations are socially accountable to themselves, to their communities, to the public. And Craig, you work for Hope for Justice, so and you're big on releasing people from modern day slavery. Just give us 1 minute on the reality of modern day slavery in our cities. What does it look like?
Sure, thanks, Mark. Obviously I'm passionate about this. And there's currently 49.6 million people globally. That's the latest estimate of those in modern day slavery. That's in forced labor, sexual exploitation, domestic servitude, organ harvesting, forced marriage. And the scale of the problem is growing year on year. It wasn't too long ago, a couple of years, that number was around 44. So it's gone from 44 million to 50 million very quickly. What that means in the UK, there's an expected 136,000 victims of modern day slavery. And what the ILO, which is the governing body who pull all the statistics together, are saying to us is that it's now a case of that it's in all of our towns and all of our cities. And at Hope for Justice, you look at that number and you're just like, wow, how on earth does that work? And I just wanted to mention this because it goes hand in hand with the unity kind of model, is that we got together with some other organizations in our sphere, if you like, IGM and other Christian organizations in our sector. And we said, what does it look like if actually we did something together? Instead of, yes, we all do our own little component parts and we have our specialisms, but actually, what if we come together and do something with one voice, pool our resources, do something that we would possibly do on our own, but what's it look like to do it together? We started this 18 months ago, and the knock-on effect has been incredible. We produced together a couple of kind of public-facing films to raise awareness, and we brought some collaborative partners in to that project. 1 in 10 people in the UK saw those films and responded to them, which is pretty good going, actually, in terms of scale and reach. In a month's time, we're doing a round table with experts around the judiciary system and sentencing around perpetrators of modern day slavery, and having an expert paper come out of that. So I say that in as much as individually we're doing our bit. Hope for Justice reached over 200,000 victims of modern day slavery last year. But when you read that number, 49.6 million people, we're not going to get close to that. We know that. And it's working collaboratively, it's working in unity, it's working not just with business, but with churches, governments, and other organizations to work together to make this impact that we need to see. So that's a little bit of context. And at Hope, we have various different things. We set up a social enterprise 5 years ago called Slave Free Alliance, where we work with companies to mitigate the risk of slavery in supply chains. We've now got 150 corporates signed up to membership. 15 of the FTSE 100 are signed up as members. So it's embryonic. It's you know, we're kind of pioneering in the space, but when we are making impact, and I would love to see more kind of unity with church movements in this space, because we've got a lot of examples of where that works, and I'll touch on that in a little bit later. But that's a little bit of context setting anyway.
Yeah, amazing, Craig. I mean, it's just absolutely shocking, isn't it? And when you dig into the personal life stories that people are exploited like this, in this country as well, it just begs belief, really, that human beings can do this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Clearly, you've got a big bit of work going on with businesses who are, you know, should be investigating their practices in this country as well as their supply chains overseas. And you know, clearly every Christian should be concerned about this, shouldn't they? I mean, every person, but you know, there's a sense that as Christians we should be taking responsibility where we can. Yeah, you've developed, or you are in the process of developing, a Spot the Signs online training course, which I think we talked about maybe rolling out across churches. We have some experience looking at that on suicide prevention, that it's been in Greater London. We rolled out you know, an online training course that's been very effective, equipping the church to engage with suicide prevention. I guess our hope is that something similar might happen across the church network. Do you want to just give us a quick 1 minute on what you hope for that?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I think one of the main ways that we see unity networks coming into this space is helping to mobilize those that are passionate about making cities slave free, and giving some structure and actually some design around where that impact can be brought. Jesus didn't call us to be kind of passive observers, did he? But equally, you know, he didn't call us to be leaderless activists, and we've got to have that. You know, I think it was Andy mentioned previously about kind of being salt and light, and that means really actively engaging with the world around us, and in a way that influences others and helps bring change. I don't know if you saw it, kind of, I don't know, probably this time last year, maybe longer than that. There was a social media reel going around with this guy who was at this music festival, and he was doing this crazy dance. I don't know if you saw it, and he's in this field and he was doing this dance, and then suddenly one or two people kind of, you know, stood with him, didn't they? And they started doing this crazy dance. Like that 10 became 100, and that 100 1,000, and suddenly this whole field was full of these people doing this crazy dance. And he was really intentional about what he was doing. He was, you know, he was just setting out to do something that he felt was important to him. And it begs the question, I think, what does it look like to be intentional around this space, and instead of being kind of sporadic and everyone doing their little bit? And I think one of the things we've seen is training and equipping. It's really what makes the difference around kind of making impact. It needs structure, it needs a plan, and I think one of the most impactful ways that we can work together is by having encouraging and empowering the church to kind of get people together and know what it looks like to bring that impact. And just very quickly, I just want to tell a quick story around, we had a church in Birmingham who came to us and said, look, we're running a soup kitchen day and evening, certain days, we'd love you guys to do a little bit of training with people who are already serving the vulnerable, and that's those potentially may be exploited. Would you do that with us? And we did, and it was a 20 minutes training package that we've developed with that, and we provided it to the church. And two of the frontline workers came to us a week after, 5 days actually afterwards, and said, we've done the training, and actually what we're seeing is there's some stuff that it just ticks all the boxes. We're just not 100% sure. So we brought in West Midlands Police to look at it, and they agreed. They said, yeah, we think there's something suspicious here, and we'd like to investigate that with Hope for Justice. And to kind of tell a long story in 30 seconds, it worked out that actually where we thought there might be 1 or 2 victims, there was actually 400 victims. We found £2 million in cash. We found 6 keys to Bentleys, and we traced it right back to Poland, actually. And these victims were living in squalid conditions, rat-infested properties, no heating, no hot water. They were washing themselves in the local canal. They had no beds, only scraps of food. And it is actually the biggest European heist of a trafficking gang in history. 15 trafficking gang members are now serving prison sentences, and that came through a very small group, within the church, and it just shows the impact of what that can do. So to answer your question, Mark, because I know I haven't answered it, we're producing a 20-minute training program for churches with some small group material and other materials, in the hope that churches will partner with us to actually work with those that are already in this space. Most of our churches, right, they've got cafes or shelter groups, or you name it. They've got soup kitchens. There's a ton of community work that already goes on. We're not asking the church to invest in this area with cash or anything else. We're just saying, can you get those people who are passionate about serving those that are vulnerable to take this training? The training's all free, and we know that will have impact because we're already seeing case studies of it happening. Yes, sorry, Sam.
I think that sounds absolutely incredible, and would love to do something like that. The first thought that comes into my mind is that I really struggle to get people to do more courses. And so I know the ideal would, of course, be for people to get all the information from the course, but I'm just wondering, is there any possibility of, let's say, getting bite-sized videos? If it's called Spot the Signs and there are, let's say, 10 signs, could you do like 30-second videos that we can send out to volunteers, put on our social media to whet people's appetites?
Absolutely, and we have that already, Sam. So the training's 20 minutes in its entirety, but then it's broken down into these subgroups, and they're like literally 2-3 minutes each, and they give a bite size. The social media ones are 20 seconds because we know
that's what I was thinking.
Social media is going to spend 3 minutes. So we've got that covered. So that's all part of that training, and we just know we've had a lot of case studies recently, and this might shock you, where traffickers are actually using drop-in centres as recruitment spaces to recruit those that are going for those drop-in spaces, and it's grim, it's bad, but it's happening. So we want to basically have part of the training to those that are already providing a service to those that are vulnerable, to say, hey, you need to look out for this as well. This is a real thing. It's happening. We've got case study after case study. This is what to look out for. These are the signs of that. So it's all within the same training. But we're trying to mobilize and encourage the church to really bring an impact in their own community. And I think that's the only way to do it.
Yeah, it's incredible work. And I think, there is one level of thinking about, can we, stop modern day slavery? But then there's another question, which is, can we create a slave-free town or city? It's a bigger question, isn't it?
Yes.
And we've been asking a similar question on poverty. Rather than can we just alleviate poverty, can we see a poverty-free town and city? It demands it's a bigger question, and it demands some bigger thinking, I think. And that's where a church unity movement, again, is very valuable in terms of thinking this through. What can we do collectively to see that bigger answer happening? Craig, I know we've been, talking about that with you, and I suppose you've talked about some of the things that churches do in terms of their social action, but actually people going off to work, as they engage with their organisations, there is the opportunity to raise this subject with their CSR offices, in their companies. And I suppose I just wanted to pop back to you, Sam, on this one about whether you've got any tips really for Christians who perhaps work in an office or for an organisation about how they might best go about approaching the CSR department in a company or organisation, and say, have you thought about, anti-slavery and supply chains, and have you got any thoughts on that from your experience?
I wasn't expecting you to ask me that question. I think it's quite different. I think that can I come at it from a different way and share a little bit about what the kind of CSR landscape looks like in business now? And some of you may already know this indeed, so apologies if it's covering old ground, because I think it's changed a lot over the last few years. So CSR is the old name given to corporate social responsibility, where the focus was very much on kind of the social aspect and tended to be about companies giving money to charities. And, that's okay, buy this product, the money goes there, or matched giving, or whatever it is, and it was fine. But the discussion's got much broader over recent years, and they now talk about ESG. So those being the 3 goals. So environment, social and governance. And that's because there are investment funds that want to invest in companies that have got good track record on ESG, but not all funds are interested in that. And obviously when economic times are difficult, it often gets dropped off the priority list again. But the good news is that younger people really do care, and so it keeps finding itself on the agenda. What I understand is the situation at the moment is that most of the activity within ESG tends to sit around carbon reduction and charitable giving, mainly because those 2 are the things that you can measure. It's very difficult to measure the other things. The other thing that companies are spending a lot of time on now is B Corp. So this is it's like a kite mark for security. It's a badge to show that you're an ethical company. So I think a lot of businesses are going through that. Although again, there's quite a lot of controversy because some companies are gaming the system, and you're thinking, goodness, how on earth did they get it? So I think ESG and B Corp seem to be the bigger things now. And I was having to think about what, when I say I think about this almost all the time. What are the things that we can encourage Christians to do to engage with this within business? And I think so much of it depends on the level of influence that you have within the company that you work for and the size of the company. And what I always start with is everybody can do the 6 M's. So the LIC stuff that Andy was talking about right at the start, they make a massive difference to the day in, day out working of a company, the culture that's formed, and actually the ability for anybody, even if you're quite low down in an organisation, to have an impact every day. So I wouldn't underestimate that. I think if you've got a lot of decision-making responsibility, then there are some great organisations out there. Has anybody heard of Blueprint for Better Business? So it was started by Paul Polman, I think, who was the former
Unilever.
Who actually, I'm not sure he's a practicing Christian, but he did start adult life in the seminary and then decided it wasn't for him. But he's very motivated by Christian values. And that really helps business leaders think strategically about the whole lot, rather than just saying, right, well, we're going to give a bit of money over here, or we're going to help this project over here. Think about the whole fabric and the business model of how they go to market. But I think the thing that for unity movements, which I don't think it would be a really interesting one to crack this, and I don't think there's anything out there at the moment, is when it comes to ESG goals, the S bit is social. And we were saying that the main things that are measurable at the moment are carbon and your charitable giving. How would you measure social impact? And I know there are lots of tools out there, but from what I pick up from my friends who are still in business, it's like there isn't much there with a huge amount of credibility. But even if you were to take the metrics that have the most credibility, how can churches actually get their heads around this and put a value on the social action that they do, or charities put a value on that social action they can do, so that as companies collaborate with them, they can start getting these working towards their ESG metrics and outcomes.
Yeah.
So I think those, I would say, are the big ones. I'm not sure that walking across to your CSR manager's desk and, you know, it depends on the company. I don't know. But those are my starters for 10 anyway.
That's brilliant, Sam, and you've got so much experience. We're grateful for, you sharing it. I want us to kind of just move track slightly to chaplaincy, and Tony, I'm going to come to you first, because you don't wear a dog collar or a badge that says chaplain, and yet I know from the work that you do that actually you've got a real heart of a chaplain in the sphere of work that you're in, the industry that you're in. Just give us a quick insight or a story that illustrates something of the opportunities that you have to be a chaplain, really, to some of your fellow comics in the comedy business.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's yeah, I think coming back to it does relate in right from the beginning of the discussion with Andy in terms of looking at spheres. And I remember it was Milton Jones said this to me once. We had a meetup. There's quite a few Christians in comedy that have a meetup. I remember him saying, what I like about this space is that you don't have to describe before you get to a problem, you don't have to describe the context to a problem, which makes a lot of sense. So, someone might, in church or whatever context it might be in, a prayer meeting or whatever, say, how's things going? And then you want to describe one issue, right? You have to then describe a whole series of context behind an issue before you even get to, well, do you know what? I'm struggling with, let's say, a creative block, or I'm struggling with, I've been blocked by this, I'm having a problem with this promoter, or whatever's specific within the industry. So I think there's real there's real scope for gathering in that context. So so personally, it's the moments come in terms of almost like a chaplaincy role. It's finding where your chapel is. So but I make a beeline for try and get there early. Things happen in the green room, but things also happen in outside of the context. So there's all sorts of so many stories. I don't know where to start really, but there was one comedian who struggling with well, here we go. So for instance, just over 5 years ago, there was a comedian that was struggling with his context as family and his sexuality. And I was doing a show out in Cyprus, and then he and I put it on my social media. Said, "Look, I'm here," and he said, "I'm on holiday with my family." And so we he came to the hotel I was working at, and we met up, and incredible moments. Like, so he goes in Cyprus and in Paphos, there's a thing called Tomb of the Kings, and he said, I don't know why, but I keep getting drawn to to this place called Tomb of the Kings and lying down in a grave. Right, and so he did, and so I visited the place as well, and then we talked over this. Anyway, he went through all sorts of things over the next few years, and unfortunately, last year, January, he died in a car accident late at night, and coming back from a gig. So a lot, and it's things with comedians driving back late at night, sometimes very, very tired. And we tracked back, and I spoke to his wife just beforehand, and I was like saying, look, this is where we all met. We last met was 4 years ago. And the weekend that we'd met was on Easter weekend 4 years ago. And discussing it with his wife, and I had a picture of him lying down in a grave and saying, I'm really feeling drawn to it. And he actually he went into a coma. He held on for 5 weeks, and he died on Easter Saturday 4 years later. So there's all sorts of amazing moments. We've talked that through with his wife and all the rest of it. But essentially, it's chaplaincy. It's about being available. It's about being just open to all sorts of amazing conversations, really, and inviting people into your home as well. I think I've had a lot of with the work that I do, just having a family home and having a spare room. And there's been some amazing times where it's in between the moments, so having people stay over has led to lots of great conversations. But and on and on. I won't keep you with that, but it's a real honour to be in that world.
Thank you, Tony. And I know we've been running a men's retreat for a number of years now, where a lot of the study and experience that you've got with this pastoral work in the workplace, you've shared with countless men actually over the years. And there's a way there of sharing and passing on some of those skills so that other men can go and do likewise, really unofficially, normally, but just in a kind of chaplaincy role of caring for people's souls and journeying with them. So yeah, bless you, mate. We're just going to give the last words, I think, to Dick, if that's all right. And Dick, I guess just about equipping Christians in this idea of chaplaincy. We've got Tony, who's does it kind of unofficially, and yet is very gifted at it. Can you just help us think about how we equip Christians more in some of the skills of chaplaincy? I mean, there's some really good mental health resources in churches now to equip Christians. I guess, there's chaplaincy skills courses. We've talked a little bit about corporate social responsibility, and I wonder whether there's anything there that we can equip people with for the workplace. But just any reflections on how we equip Christians in this kind of chaplaincy role, whether it be official or unofficial, in their workplaces.
My word. In a few minutes, what can we say? I want to go back to what Sam was saying, actually, because I think there's a key thing there, which is just giving people the confidence to be themselves in the faith that they know and have in the place that they find themselves, wherever that may be. When we do training of our chaplains, we have run a national training course online, and we have had 100 more people over since COVID doing that course. We're in the middle of it. We're going to do the final session of the course tomorrow evening. We always talk about the first skill of a chaplain is to be present with people. And we explore what it is to be present, both in practical terms, but also in a sense of walking alongside, but at a spiritual level as well. And I can tell you so many stories over the last, I've been involved with this for years, but again and again, when you're present with somebody at the right moment. And it wasn't something which you could plan for, or you could get a committee together and say, how can we be in the right place? It was just being led by the Spirit to be in the right place at the right time. I think of a young man, for example, when I was lead chaplain with Asda, meeting on the stairs in a big Asda store that was built vertically rather than horizontally because there wasn't much space. And he was a cleaner. He was a young man, a Muslim from Eritrea, and this is going back a few years now. But his story, part of his story was nobody ever spoke to him because he was a cleaner. And he was black in a context which wasn't very black, as it were. And I stopped as I went down the stairs, and he was cleaning the stairs, and we had a conversation. And that was the first of many conversations. Now, what led me to that particular staircase, what led him to be there at that particular moment, all I can say is that must have been the Holy Spirit, because those moments are given to us by God. And we kid ourselves if we think that we're in charge of this and that we can actually organize it. What we need to do, first of all, is to trust in God to lead us to the right place and to have the confidence in the faith that we have to speak of God's kingdom in the right way at that particular moment. That's incarnational. There's a deep incarnational spirit about this ministry, just being with people and letting God lead you to the conversations and the things you wish to speak about from your heart at that moment. And I think of the story in John's Gospel of Jesus meeting the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman. Being in the right place at the right time is not necessarily of our making, and I think it's about faithfulness in that moment. So that's one thing I think I say in response to your question, Mark. Trying not to be too structured about this, leaving there space for God to actually lead us and to be before us, so that we can simply marvel at the times when we discover for ourselves something new about God's love and care for all that God has made in the world, and how through Christ he is redeeming all of that. So we, the agenda of transformation, how can we, in the way we began, Mark, with how do we transform this? Well, God is transforming this, and what we need to do is have faith in God's grace to see the world transformed. That's a starting point, and I think that's a good place to begin.
Wonderful, wonderful. All part of the journey of discipleship, isn't it? And following Jesus and discerning how we join in with him. I want to thank you all so much. You're all amazing leaders, and we've been really blessed by your contributions as we throw this around. How we explore transformation, how we ask the bigger questions about transforming our whole town, our whole city, and by using all the parts of the body, all the different congregations and buildings and gatherings that we gather in as the church, how can we be harnessed to see a sense of a new city coming, God's kingdom coming. So thank you. I'm just going to share, for those that might be watching on Catch Up, our advert to the Gather Summit, which is the 17th and 18th of June, where we're going to be thinking again about these big questions. What is it to see a poverty-free city? What is it to see the ecosystem for social enterprise to thrive in our towns and cities? And how can the church play a part in it? What is it to see a new city for children and families, and also our churches working together collectively? So if you're watching on Catch Up, then please do check our website and come along and join in this really important conversation. Andy, you wanted to just share something?
I guess also for those who might be watching this on Catch Up, we've now put together, I've just literally got together all the resources and stories of those who've been running sphere groups in different places around the country, and a kind of a how-to guide. Finally got all that text together, so hopefully that will become something slightly more beautiful than a huge Word document within the course of the next few months, and hopefully that'll be useful to people as a kind of a, not to say this is how you have to do it, but just sharing some stories about this is how it's happened and this is how it's worked well.
That's awesome. Really exciting. We'll look forward to sharing that with you all. Guys, thanks so much.